This is like, a new experience for me to sit on this side of the campaign because I've helped a lot of other people, do the leg work and, the background work and stuff. So this is my first time actually being out front. So.
Yeah. Nice. So, yeah, we're just kind of sound checking, and these guys will let us know when we're good to go.
Sure.
So, but, yeah.
How long have you guys been doing this?
We kind of started putting stuff together and putting the studio together, like, I don't know, probably a year ago, I guess.
Okay.
And we did a few episodes here and there. We just kind of kept adding to the studio, and just whenever we would come in to work on things, we'd just record something just to, get it out there and get familiar with the process. So, but yeah, we really didn't start doing it with like any real regularity or intensity until, this year. Mm-hmm. So we felt like we kind of got to a spot, and, you get a few episodes out there and then people can kind of see what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, oh, well, if that's what it is, I'll come on, so
sure.
We had a handful of people that, had said they wanted to come on for a while, or that, we had some people that were kind of encouraging me to do this. That was kind of I've told this story a bunch of times. So, yeah, we've had some people over time kind of being like, hey, you should do something. And, it's just been interesting how many people, we've gotten to know who are really involved. And since I came back, from New York, when I went to New York, I didn't like what was going on there, and I didn't like how things were set up and how mm-hmm. difficult it was to raise a family in, what I guess would be more traditional, where, your wife can help, can raise your kids and she's not working. You're not just dropping them off to somebody else. And that's more what we were looking for. And so it was just so hard to do. I was working, I had times where I was working 80, 90 hours a week just to barely scrape by. I remember having jobs where, I'd go to my day job, and then I drove a black car in the city. So it's not a taxi. It's like it would be what would be considered a limousine, but it's not a limo. It's just a luxury car or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, we had accounts with like the Mets and a bunch of law firms and things like that, some of the sports channels. So we'd take people back and forth from the airport or whatever. And, mm-hmm. So I would like go during the day, and I did low voltage. So we were doing like datacom mm-hmm. in schools over there, just upgrading all the city schools. And then I would get off work and I'd start driving into the city in my car. And then like I would literally change my outfit at stoplights. And so by the time I would get into the city, eventually I'd had like be dressed to do that job. Mm-hmm. And then I would do that until basically as long as I could stand it, and then get up and do it again, and then I had other gigs that I was doing when it wasn't really worth driving into the city to work. There's times that were not super profitable, and the economy was not great at the time. So a lot of people were doing that kind of work. When I got into it was right before or right after, no, actually, I think it was right before 2008 that I started doing that. And so when 2008 hit, totally changed the economy over there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the companies were cutting down on those kinds of expenses. And so just the market on that, dropped a ton. Yeah. But I was already in, I already, bought a franchise and owned a car and all that stuff. So there's a lot of startup expense to that. But, it was crazy. So we came back here and was not the Lewis County that I left, in 2003. It was 2003, I think. And so, I've just been kind of, tried to figure out how to get involved. Ended up, when we moved back, we just moved on to the same street as Sean Swope. And it was before he was running for anything or even thinking about running for anything. And so I just ran into him while actually me and Micah were taking a walk I just ran into him, talked to him, and then we would talk about stuff, and he ended up running, and and we were always talking about ways to get involved, and that's when he suggested I'd go look at the planning commission, and so applied for that, and I thought, well, I could handle 4 hours a month or so, but
as if that's all it takes.
yeah. Well, that's all it takes for me. No, I'm kidding. No, no. There's a lot of reading.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a funny thing too, because that's why it's hard, and one of the reasons why I've tried to stick with it is that it's really hard to get people. It's easier to get people whose kids are grown up and they're maybe retired and they have the time for that stuff, and that's awesome. We need those, and that's more in the position that you're in.
Yeah.
And we need people like in that spot, but we also need people who are really in the middle of doing it, and so I've tried to really stick around just to be able to bring that perspective of, this is currently what's happening to those of us who are out here producing, and and I obviously don't have a lot of time. I've got 4 kids and a wife and a house and all that stuff, and have a lot of responsibilities in my career, and so it's like I didn't have a lot of time to be involved the way I wanted to be. But I figured, well, I could do that, So I've learned a ton. I figured it would be good. I would learn a lot, and I have, just about land use and just the way that government works, a little bit. I've said on this a bunch of times, I've gotten a lot more grace for people in government, because I remember, I think I came home from the second or third one that I ever went to, because you just show up to these things. There's no they don't really prep you. They go, congratulations, you're on this thing. And you go, okay. Yeah. And they're like, meetings Tuesday. And you show up and you're like, I have no idea what anybody's talking about the first few times. I don't know how it works. So it's really funny that way. And I remember coming home, my wife's like, so how's this thing going? I was like, I think I have a lot more grace for people who are, who are in politics, because if this is how they have to make really important decisions, no wonder they seem insane all the time, because it's really hard to get all the information that you'd like. I mean, this is not in my business or the business that any of the businesses I've ever been involved in. I would never make a decision that way. There's a lot of times where you're not allowed to get as much information as you'd like, because it has to be within a public forum, and it's hard to pull those resources into that space. There's a lot of stuff that just gets presented to you, even last minute. How much stuff do we tend to get, right at the last minute? And it's and especially for somebody like me, where my kids are in sports, and it's how am I supposed to get through all that stuff? Yeah. They're like, oh, well, we sent you something at 4, and the meeting's at 6. I'm like, dude, I haven't even been home, and so, I just thought, man, no wonder, a lot of, that's not the only reason, obviously, but I just thought, man, this is a really insane process in trying to make a decision.
They're two completely, different types of institutions. You've got your family and business, and, there's definitely a thought process there that you go through, and you're a lot more nimble, in business.
For sure.
You're definitely in the driver's seat of your own domain. But with government, it's not your domain. I may be involved in the Planning Commission, as I have for the last 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it is. But, it's not my domain. It's the public's domain. And there's a lot of local and state law that really goes into what we do, and the privacy, the public information stuff. There's so many different things you have to consider. And you can't run government like a business. And I know that's a common thought out there. We want Trump because he's a businessman. Well, there is a lot to be said for that. I'm not discounting that. However, government is still government, and the public puts a lot of restrictions on us on what we can and cannot do, and a lot of it has been because government has made a mistake. So the government then has to come up with a way to satisfy the public to fix that problem so it doesn't happen again. And this is the problem that we have even with the VA, where I worked for a long time, is that, the VA is charged with taking care of our veterans and their family, okay, to the extent that the law, allows and requires. The problem is, you're implementing these multi-billion-dollar programs, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong. And so what does Congress do? They go in to try to fix it through legislation. And when they do, they don't always consider all of the different ramifications of their bills and their laws. So to fix this problem, you have unintended consequences that result in another aspect of what you're doing. And so what I found when I was processing veterans' claims for benefits is you have competing laws sometimes that you have to try to work around or work through in order to satisfy the different objectives. So not only do you have to know the letter of the law, but you also have to understand the spirit of the law. And again,
100%.
the public's perception. Perception is everything in government. It could be the furthest thing from the truth, but if the public sees something a certain way, that's fact to them.
Yeah.
And you can't discount that. All you can do is try to educate them and tell them, well, this is really the way it is, so it's a never-ending cycle of chasing your tail sometimes, and it can be maddening.
No, I think that's true. I think that's a really good point. That's something I didn't understand. I have a lot more appreciation for. Is that I think there's actually, because I've said that back in the past. Like, man, why can't they just do this and just get it over with? And there are solutions that seem super obvious. I was just watching, Rogan talking to RFK. And there's all these things that you have wide political support for, and yet it takes forever to get it actually accomplished. And it's easy to go, well, why can't they just do it?
Yeah.
But I think there's part of it, having been part of this process now, where I appreciate the pace of government a little bit more, because even though it takes us sometimes a really long time, and what we're dealing with is a super small, I don't want to undervalue it, but it's, in the grand scheme of government, like it's a smaller item, and it's a pretty specific thing, and we're going on, pretty straightforward criteria on a lot of it. And so I would consider it kind of, one of the, it would be easier than a lot of things. It's not as complex as a lot of issues that government is tackling. And even that pace, sometimes it's like, man, we've been working on this thing for a year, and it still feels like we're maybe not ready, Yeah,
we're trying to fill a dump truck with a teaspoon sometimes,
Yeah.
And that's the way it can seem, but all of the hard work and the detail, that we get into is really necessary for the proper administration of, like, for the instance, the land use issues that we deal with on the Planning Commission. Imagine, if we just willy-nilly just, did things because it sounded good at the moment, that, I'm sorry, do we have to go? Or
No.
Start? Okay.
We're kind of started. This will probably all get in there. So
okay.
It'll be what it is. It's
Okay.
hard. We start sound checking, and it's
Yeah.
like we just get into a good conversation, so we might as well just roll with it.
Sure.
But I will take this opportunity then just to go. Well, we got Frank Corbin in the house, and and I don't want to cut you off there because we're going to get into a lot of that stuff.
Sure.
But we'll kind of do, even though it's late into the process here, we'll just kind of do a proper introduction. So, why don't you just introduce yourself and then just kind of give me, because one of the things that I don't know if you know this, and I don't know if I told you this, but when we started this thing, you were actually on my list of people. I kind of made a list of like, well, how many people would I have right off the bat that I'd like to talk to about local stuff? And so you were actually on there, and it was before I really knew you very well, but I know you're involved in a ton of things. And so, and I think that's really interesting. And some of the things that I didn't even know you were involved in were things that I wanted to talk to people about. So we'll probably get into some different things, but just kind of give me a little, resume of kind of what you do now and what you've been up to, and we'll kind of start off that way, and we'll kind of wind back into this thing.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'll try to give you the short version, but
Yeah.
I was originally born in Longview, Washington, and raised in Cathlamet, Washington, a town of 656 people. It was a town that had a number of people who were servants of the state. Senator Mark Domet, for one, who did a stellar job in his service to the state. Former Congresswoman Julia Butler Hanson, who was my former employer when I was in high school. She hired me to do her yard work while she was, doing her last year of Congress when she retired and moved back home. So that, and my mom was involved with the fair board. My dad was a logger. So, I grew up in a very rural environment with public service as a significant input or emphasis in my life. That we all should give back to our communities. And so that's really my upbringing and my, what made me who I am. And fast forward, 1977, I joined the Navy, served 4 years. I had a security clearance, was involved in communications, and served overseas in the Philippines and also on a ship called the USS Camden. And got out in 1981 and enjoyed my service. However, Jimmy Carter was president at the time, and our budget was low and morale was low, and we had just come through the Iranian hostage crisis, 440 days of captivity for our Americans that were captured at the embassy there in Tehran. It was just a very difficult time, and when they approached me about reenlisting, there was no money to offer me any kind of a reenlistment bonus or, a choice of duty station or anything. And so, when there was no incentive to reenlist, I had the GI Bill. So I thought, I'm just going to go out, and go to college and get my degree and pursue my passion of being a pastor. And so as I did that, I completed college in Seattle, but I started in Portland and served in the ministry, unpaid staff, a number of years. But so in so doing, I also had to work secular work. So I did 6 years in banking. I did some time as a finished carpenter. I did, some electrical work. I worked under a licensed electrician and did some grunt work for them, and did a number of things, and really enjoyed myself. And while at the same time serving in the church and doing things ministry related, I was also what Paul would call himself a tent maker ministry. In the New Testament, and which
I'm a huge fan of, by the way.
Yeah,
I think it's really, and it's not necessarily to knock people that don't work outside of being a pastor, but I think it's, the same as, what we see today in politics, where people have never done anything but politics. I think that's really, it's tough to represent people that you literally don't share anything in common with.
Yeah, you don't rub shoulders with or anything.
And you don't have any way of really understanding the life that they've lived. And so, you do tend to get, better politicians, just across the board when they've done something else. But yeah, no, I think the same thing a lot of times with pastors is, it's really beneficial when you're either able to do something at the same time. It takes all, there's a lot of businesses that I've known where, and same with starting a show. It's like, you're not making money right away. Like you gotta be able to do everything, if you want to start a new thing. And so I always like when somebody who starts anything kind of comes in with that approach that, I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to try to get, I'm just going to get started. And then I'm going to just get as good as I can get. And then, if I can bring value, the reward will come. But, they don't come in and go, well, if I can't start making money, I'm not going to do it at all. And I think that really robs you of all there's so much good that you get out of showing up every day, wondering if you're going to be good enough to make it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think, I think I talked a little bit with the superintendent about this, but I talk to educators about this all the time. One of the things that concerns me just about, out of the many, many things that concern me about public education, but they basically sell you on the idea that it's not good to not get 100% on everything. And that's the total opposite of how life works. You get the A at the end. You should be getting F's, like, cause you got to start not knowing anything. There's a quote that I really like that, success is, I'm going to totally butcher it but just the idea is that, success is about getting in over your head and then trying to figure out how to not be in over your head.
That's the best education, trial by error, and getting in there and doing things that stretch yourself, that demand creativity and, and learning and then finding the right people to learn from, that's important. And so there's a lot to be said, for a life of hard work in lots of different fields.
Yeah.
And so, it was through that, I would always have work to do. People, word of mouth, Frank's a good worker, let's have him do this.
Yeah.
I had an insurance company call me one time, we need you to build us a reception counter. Well, I'd been a finish carpenter, but I'd never really built cabinetry before. So what did I do? I used the tools that I had. I bought what I didn't have, and I just rolled up my sleeves and I just started, building it, and it turned out really nice. I got paid really well. My dad always told me, he said, if you can do it in your head, you can do it with your hands.
Yeah.
And that always inspired me to really think about what I'm doing. And if I could somehow, remember in the high school when we took the, military entrance exams and some of the, achievement tests and stuff, we had to take these diagrams and, fold the boxes in our head. What kind of a shape will this make after you've folded all the dotted lines, and I scored extremely high on that, at a high school level. And then in the Navy, that's why they put me through teletype repair school as one of my specialties in communications. A teletype, is a mechanical machine that's absolutely it's got thousands and thousands of moving parts, and you have to be able to look at a chain of parts and see how they interact with each other to achieve a desired outcome. Mm-hmm. That's how you learn how to fix them.
Right.
If you can see it in your head, you can do it with your hands. And so that's, I guess some of the mechanical skills that I developed, was the ability to see and do that. And it started from childhood, just my dad encouraging me, here, take the hammer and nails out there and put some boards together and see if you can, come up with something. And so anyway, continuing to, through Seattle, I ended up working several years with what's now Verizon Wireless. At the time, it was U.S. West Cellular. So I worked in the telecommunications industry and got really interested in telecom. Kind of sprung from my Navy background of communications. And then we moved to Cascade Locks, Oregon, where I pastored a church. And I was a full-time pastor, but I was still working on the side. And I found myself doing odd jobs, but I was elected or asked to run for city council down there. And so I thought, well, sure, I've always believed in public service. Now, Jason, I take a slightly different approach. When I think of politics, I think of politics as the means of getting where you want to go. It's this campaign period. It's the period where you get to know me as a candidate. I get to know the public, and understand them better to try to represent them if I get elected to office. And to me, once elected to office, that's what I would call my period of public service. Because to me, I don't like the thought of serving the public and being labeled a politician. Because
right.
To me, they're not the same. The politics part is what it takes to become a public service or a public servant. And so my whole life, I moved up here from Vancouver, retired from the federal government. I took early retirement. My mom and dad lived here. Mom's health was failing, and we felt a strong pull to come up here to be close to them so that we could help take care of them. Mom passed away about 5 years ago. Dad's still with us, and he's my next door neighbor. We bought the place in front of him.
Yeah.
So we came to Lewis County really to serve my parents.
Yeah.
My wife got a job. She transferred from a hospital there in the Portland area up here to Legacy or to Providence, and she's been in the emergency room ever since. But I thought, well, with this extra time that I have on my hands, what can I do in Lewis County? I want to serve. And so I heard about the Citizen Budget Committee through an announcement that they made. And I said, you know what, that'd be a great place for me to learn something about county government because I really didn't know that much about it. I had served on the city council. I had a number of successful initiatives that I was able to get through there, and I left with a great background in government in general. But then I got a job with the Department of Homeland Security, and I learned about the federal government. Anyway, I'm not going to go back and talk about that. I'm going to say when I came to Lewis County and joined the Citizen Budget Committee, it was a fairly it was a very beneficial group to be a part of, but it wasn't that organized, and I didn't understand why it wasn't better organized. And so one of the things I proposed to the group was, at the end of our time being on this committee, we should probably submit a report to the county commissioners. Well, they had never done that before on the Citizen Budget Committee. I drafted up a report that laid out our findings and our recommendations, and the county commissioners saw that, and they were, Bobby Jackson's words, "I'm impressed." I've never seen this before. And so, that was an initiative that I did because I wanted the Citizen Budget Committee to be just more than a bunch of people coming to listen to people talk, but to actually be engaged in the process and say, okay, this is what we see, these are our recommendations. And the county commissioners, by and large at the time, agreed with our findings. And, I felt very, very proud of that, and it was quite an accomplishment. So then each year after that, I served 2 more terms on that, and we did the same thing. And then after I stopped being on the budget committee, one of my friends and former colleagues on the budget committee, he said, "Hey, I can't find the reports. Would you send me your electronic copies?" And I did. And he said, "I want to use this, and I want to develop a report for our findings." So that's really cool. To be able to do something like that. And at the same time, I'm learning volumes of stuff about the county. And I thought, man, I can do this. I can do this. Maybe someday, And so I put it on the back shelf and, just thought, I'm just going to serve, however, whatever opens up, I want to serve. And so it wasn't long before the late Gary Stamper, my county commissioner, and Edna Fund encouraged me to be involved in the Planning Commission. As soon as there's an opening, Frank, we'd like for you to be on the Planning Commission. So that's what happened. That was one of my first appointments. But I served not only in the Planning Commission, but the Veterans Advisory Board as the chair. I served on the Lewis County Seniors Board. I'm on the Flood Control Zone District Advisory Committee. I served there as a vice chair. Planning Commission, I've been chair now. This is my 3rd year as chair. And then I've recently started a nonprofit down in Cathlamet, my hometown, to try to preserve the historic home museum of the former Congresswoman. And we're trying to, preserve her legacy. And so, I've had this time to share, and I've learned so much, and I thought, if there's an opportunity to run for office, I'm going to really seriously consider it. And I personally have a belief that if a person is doing a good job, and you're of the same party as them, you don't run against somebody that's doing a good job. And, I felt like, our commissioner, Scott Brummer, is serving in that position right now. Larry Grove, has been serving honorably for a very long time. And when he decided he wasn't going to run, I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run for that position because I think, in the overall scheme of things, my background has prepared me well for the ability to manage a government department and to be able to evaluate and to make improvements where I can. But honestly, as I look, and the more I learn about the auditor's office, it's so well run. I don't see any major issues that need to be fixed. But as with anything, there can always be improvements. And I've got a couple of ideas that I'd like to run on. But honestly, the best thing that I could do is to follow in Larry Grove's footsteps and to try to be the best that I can be to carry on his already well done legacy that he's left behind, and to support the staff that are there. There's about a dozen or so staff members. The budget's south of $700,000. Try to find where we can cut expenses where we can. But my priority is to make sure that the staff are well supported so that they can provide the best service to our citizens in Lewis County. Yeah. And I think with my broad background, I think I'd be excellent at that.
Yeah. So just to make it clear, so you are running for auditor. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so and we've talked about this, and I know this is going to come up probably a million times. So explain what the auditor does, or just kind of your view of that, and what you think an auditor should be focused on. And then also, just for everybody out there, the auditor is not the assessor.
Correct.
Right? So
they both start with an A, but that's the only similarities.
That's one of those things that, I've gotten confused on that in the past. I've just never really thought much about it. But so just explain the difference between the two, just because that's one of the things we really want to try to do on this is help people understand their local government a lot better. I mean, among a bunch of other things we want to try to accomplish here. But, when we have people, when we're talking about local government, we really want to try to help educate people on how that works, what they should be looking at when they're going to vote for these things. We want to give people, we really like this long form medium where we can just take all the time that we need to get everything explained. People have all the time that they want to be able to show who they are. Because, man, you get these ballots and you've never heard of any of these people, and you just end up voting for R's and D's, half the time, and you don't even know if they're any good, or what kind of a person they even are. So explain what an auditor does, and just if you could quickly, because I know you know a decent amount about the assessor's office as well, just without just in your understanding those two things, and then and then just go into a couple of the things that you do want to run on, some of the things that you really are looking to improve upon.
Sure. Okay. Well, the assessor's office, has their sets of laws that they have to follow, and they're responsible for property tax evaluations, or assessments, I should say. That's something that they do on a regular basis. Everybody's property gets, reappraised every so often, and, that goes a long way towards determining what a person's tax burdens are. The auditor's office doesn't do that. The auditor's office focuses.
So if you don't like your taxes, don't come at Frank.
And I've already had a lot of people say, I'm so upset because of my property taxes keep going up. And I say, well, that's not me. That's not the auditor's office. That's a function of the assessor's office. The auditor's office, their job is, the only thing that they really do there related to that is, they have to, be the recipients of the funds, that property owners have to pay. And also through the the treasurer's office. So there's interworking parts there. They work together. But the primary functions of the auditor's office, number one, is elections. Okay, that's, I would say, at top of my list. That the public, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or none of the above, everybody's concerned about ethics in elections and running our election systems in an open, transparent way in accordance with law, not in accordance with people's thoughts and preferences and, theories and, all this stuff. We have to follow the law. If we don't like the law, then we have to do what's called the work to change the law, and that's working through our legislators to do that. And that involves the citizens to do that. As an auditor, I would certainly, advocate where I can, for changes in the law where necessary. But things come to us, and so our job in the auditor's office when it comes to elections is to take the law that's been changed or passed or whatever and implement them in accordance with the law. All right, we don't have a lot of leeway, let's emphasize this over this, and no, you have to follow the law. Yeah. And so there are laws that could be coming down from the federal level that may have to go through the court systems before they can actually become law in Washington. But if some of the ideas of the administration, to require voter ID and require in-person voting and no more mail-in voting except for certain, situations like it used to be when I was a young voter. Yeah. Where, absenteeism or, different things or, disability, things like that, where you can't come in. There are provisions for mail-in voting just like, it used to be. And I think that that's what the administration's, considering, keeping. But this widespread vote by mail, I think, is what the administration is wanting to change. Now, whether that can actually trickle down to the state and local level, that's going to be something that's going to take time, and it'll go through the courts. Somebody's going to sue somebody for something, and it's going to take time. But whatever the end result is, I want to be a responsible implementer of that law, whatever it turns out to be.
Yeah.
You know, fidelity to the law is absolutely paramount, because that's the only thing that's going to save you in a court of law. You know, did you follow the law? You know, and I've been a person of integrity, and I've tried to live my life, you know, in accordance with the law the very best that I can. Am I perfect? No. You know, but I can say that I've honestly given life my best shot to be an honorable person. When it comes to the things in the auditor's office, you know, there's an incredible staff that will be able to help you. There's legal counsel available, you know, that I would have access to. I mean, all of those resources will help inform the very best decisions possible.
Yeah.
The auditor's office needs to be run independently of the political offices. And I call them political offices in counter to what I said earlier. You know, the county commissioners, you know, their jobs are much more in the public realm. You know, they have some leeway, you know, in their decision-making processes, you know, but the auditor's office is a lot more cut and dry. You know, you can't just take political pressure from another elected office, you know, and do what they want you to do if it's in contrast or in violation of the law. You know, you have to be a steward of your office in accordance with law. And then fiscal matters, you have to be a fiscally responsible person. And I have done federal budgeting with my positions with the federal government. I recently got in contact with one of my bosses. She's going to be very happy to provide me a public recommendation. You know, but I've had to handle millions of dollars, you know, in federal appropriated congressional funding to administer veteran benefit programs. You know, and you know, that type of experience, I think, will bring a new element or a new aspect to the department that maybe hasn't been there in the past. Now, Larry Grove's a CPA. I could not come close to his intellectual, you know, credentials, but I think with the credentials that I have, I can do a really good job. You know, and having the contracting background that I have with the federal government, federal contracting laws. I mean, those are very detailed and exacting, you know, law implemented processes that you have to do. You have to be able to interpret law and implement it. And it doesn't always come easy. You know, the stuff that you and I deal with on the Planning Commission, sometimes it gets pretty hairy, you know, and, you know, we have to weed through it, you know, and understand it before we can really render a decision.
Yeah.
But that's what I appreciate about you and the rest of our colleagues on the Planning Commission, is that we synthesize all of the information that we get, and we come right down to our discussions with each other, and we come up with decisions based on fact. And that's what we would expect from an auditor's office, is to make decisions based on fact and data. And my job title with the government, with the federal government, was a program analyst. Well, in that is quietly said data analyst, because, you know, I had to evaluate program data in order to make informed decisions about recommending improvements to services delivery to our veterans. You know, and so that was my whole, you know, existence. You know, and so it's a unique set of skills. Most contracting officers in the government stay in that lane of contract work. Budget people tend to stay in their lane of budget work. You know, I've been blessed because I had the skills to do both, and my supervisors and managers saw that, and they invested in me and put me through contracting school. They put me through budgeting classes so that I could do, you know, the job that I did. And I scored extremely high on all of my evaluations. So if I didn't think I could do the job, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've talked to people about a lot, is that you got to be careful about demanding a specialist for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
What, you know, we do this, we talk about this in, you know, our company, and and just, I mean, you talk to any leader of anything, you really, your best people come from, hiring for attitude and training for skill. And what you want in a lot of these positions is not, you don't want a specialist that's only done one thing. You want a leader that's got core principles that can pull people together. I think a lot of times, you look back at past presidents and, leaders of companies, they don't always know everything about that industry, but they do have a vision, and they know what they don't know, and they pull the people in who can supplement what they don't know, and then they go get the job done. And I think there's something really important about looking at that when we're hiring for anything. I mean, you don't want your best football player to be your coach. You know what I mean? Like, he should be the worst football player probably on your team. So what you want in a coach is a leader. You want somebody who's got a vision, somebody that can work with people, who can pull all the requisite skills together to win championships. And I think sometimes, we're voting for people like we're hiring a brain surgeon, who knows how to deal with like one specific thing really well, because that, just so it's said, if you're going in for brain surgery, you probably want a specialist.
But also the opposite.
Leadership skills not such a big deal. But
because sometimes people vote on personality.
For sure, yeah. No, we've gotten to a place, where people, act like it's American Idol, and we're, voting for America's next top, president or whatever. It is far too personality driven, and I get it. I think, the perfect candidates, can do both. But man, a lot of times people who have really big personalities, that's kind of what they got. And so that's not everybody for sure. But yeah, that's a trap that we fall into a lot. But yeah, I do think, and I think that just for anybody out there that's, I mean, in the position that I'm in, I kind of similar to you. I mean, I've had a million different jobs, like that was kind of, when I was doing financial services in New York, it was kind of the joke is that, people would always go, I did some public speaking there a little bit. And, one of the things people would do is they go, oh, I'm with this company and I used to be a whatever, I used to be an electrician. And I'd be like, look, I'm not going to waste the next hour and a half telling you about every job I've had. It's like I've had so many different jobs, but it kind of did, similar to like what you're saying, I've done so many things, and not all of it, I mean, a lot of it hasn't worked out the way that I'd hoped, but it all prepared me for, a position where you have to be able to bring a lot of different things together. And so, all of that, either, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I wouldn't even call it failure, but just, things, you learn and you fail, I mean,
if failure is a great teacher.
Yeah. If you're looking for a book, John Maxwell, Failing Forward is great. I think it just highlights that you have, like, there is no such thing as getting good at something without failing at it a lot of times prior to that.
Well, look at Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
A classic example. And he turned out to be one of our very best presidents.
Yeah.
Kept our union together, after the Civil War. I mean, there's a lot to be said for somebody who came up and worked hard, for everything that they've got. I will say, too, that one of the other things that's really important about the Office of the Auditor, besides elections, is that they also do driver's licensing, and processing those. There's a county in Washington, I won't, name it right now, but apparently they haven't been doing a very good job of it. And after several attempts by the state to get them to come into compliance, they may be losing their ability to process driver's license, auto licensing in their county. And I thought, what a horrible thing. That would be the last thing I would want to see, happen. I'm not worried about it happening in Lewis County, but
that's got to be Seattle.
It would be that type of idea that, I want to represent Lewis County in the best possible light, because we already take a lot of flack from, people at the state level because we are a red county. But when it comes to the auditor's office, I think it needs to rise above partisan politics by light years, because, elections, auto licensing, the other things that the auditor's office does, document recording and things like that, those are nonpartisan issues.
Yes,
elections
matter.
are important no matter what your label is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so are the other functions of the office. And so to run the department in a nonpartisan way would be one of my absolute top priorities, because, and I've demonstrated my ability to do that. Elizabeth Cameron and I, we led the Citizens for 911 campaign a couple of years ago to pass that sales tax increase in order to provide funding, a dedicated funding stream for our 911 operations in Lewis County. And we worked hard on that. And we had a bipartisan team. We had, Democrats, Republicans, and people that really weren't aligned with anything, jumping aboard and helping us with this. And we were successful in passing that. And I would say that that was probably one of my proudest moments of anything that I have done in the secular world, in serving, the public where I've been. Not to minimize what I've done in other things, but, that was a shining achievement to be a part of that, to serve the citizens, to serve the committee in that way, to help pass an initiative that benefits everybody. There's not a dedicated Democrat line to 911. There's not a dedicated line for Republicans. Yeah. It's everybody that's got red blood. 911 is important to you. And and that's the way I would approach the auditor's office. Now, do I have, political leanings, as a Republican? Well, sure, but I think we can compartmentalize our lives in such a way that that's not everything about us, that we can do a job and do it well. And I think Elizabeth and I were able to demonstrate that with great success.
Yeah, no, we've talked about this a lot, but I think that's a challenge that we're having in our country currently, is that people are having a really difficult time separating out their current. And I mean, I think we could even dial it in more in this way, that they're having difficulty separating their current political positions, because people's political positions will change over time.
They do.
There's that old saying that if you're not a liberal in your 20s, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative in your 40s, you have no brain. It's like, you change throughout life, and the things that the challenges that you're facing evolve with your life cycle, and so you're going to change. New information's going to come in. You're seeing a lot of this, with independents. They will lean one way for a while, and then new information comes in, they'll lean another way. And so I think, we've got an issue with that. And I we talked a little bit about this, I think, with Thad last time we did this, but, there's, I say this all the time, when you remove God from a society, it doesn't just leave nothing. You have to put something in that spot. And what always ends up being in that spot is the government. And then, there's kind of been, the attack on the father or men, with the rise of this kind of, feminist movement over, the last several decades. And so when you kind of remove all those traditional leadership or authority structures in your life, well, everybody still needs to have an authority, because at some point you need help, no matter who you are. And so, if you don't have, fathers around, you don't, have a transcendent moral authority that you would look to. The only thing that's left is the government in some fashion, because we
for
all,
some people that's true.
We come to the end of ourselves all the time, where, you make a mistake and you run out of money, or, you make a bunch of mistakes and end up in a place you didn't want to be in, or you get into trouble one way or the other. You want some issue solved. If you can't go to, if you don't have God to go to, well, you still need to go to some place because you can't do it on your own. So we have this as humans. That's just always. There's never going to be a time where that's not the case, where you're going to come to the end of yourself and need help in life. And so the problem with government being in that position is they're really crappy at it because there's still people running it. And as people, we're not good at a lot of
things. We're not divine.
No.
So, but I will say, to your point is that, for those of us that believe in God, that believe that He created the heavens and the earth and everything that's in it, God created three institutions. And I believe that those three institutions need to be in their proper place, functioning, absolutely. To the very best that they can, and then that makes for a better and a healthier society. We need a good, strong family unit. Okay, that was the first thing that God created. Brought Adam and Eve together, and they told them to be fruitful and multiply, and thus was born the family unit. Okay, and then from that, as the population increased, God instituted government. Okay, and then fast forward to the earliest times in the Old Testament when God, chose Abraham, to be, the beginnings of His chosen people, the Israelites, and then from that came, what we call the church age, where we have God's birthing institutions, the family, civil government, and also, what we would call in the Christian world the church, perhaps maybe the synagogue for the Jewish people, and the mosque for the Muslims, and so forth. We have, the institution of faith. I'll just call it that.
Yeah.
And so those are the three institutions that God created, and I believe that all three of them, in their fullest expressions, where, the family unit is there to nurture and care for the children, forms the basis of society. From that, if there's a moral family, you've got moral people that are running government, and hopefully you've got the same, moral people, in the church or in the, in the institutions of faith. And so, I think that if the government continues to tamp down on the rights of the church, which is where this idea of separation of church and state comes from. It's never mandated in the Constitution. However, the concept of separation of church and state was to keep government out of the business of the church. Let the church be the church, and let, government be the government. But, the government is made up of people who are of faith and not of faith. And government is also made up of, of people, that come from families.
Yeah.
And so we need to respect and support all three.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm glad you made that point, because it's not to say that government doesn't have a place in the world, or that God doesn't even want, God did establish government. I think on an individual level, it's what the hierarchy of authority is in your life. And it's important for the government too to have a moral authority over itself. You look at any of the successful countries that have had long-term success. That was a major part of it, especially in its founding. A lot of times, you see this in the Old Testament all the time. The Jews would get really close to God, and then and then things would go really well. And then they'd be like, "Oh, well, I guess we don't need you anymore." And that's just human nature. And we're kind of in that phase right now as a country. There's kind of there's a study I came across when I was in, I think I was taking an anthropology class or something in college, and it was the Cycle of Nations. I think it was a paper written in the 40s. But I remember seeing that and going, well, man, everything makes so much sense to me now, because it's just a human nature cycle that we have where, given enough time, we forget, where we came from and how we got to where we're at, and then we mistakenly believe that we had something to do with all this prosperity, and then everything gets out of whack from there. We tend to, as humans, will take got off of his place and we want to put ourselves or somebody else above that. And you see that through all societies in history. And then you end up with a collapse at some point. So, our success will obviously, in my opinion, it's pretty clear. It's going to hinge on whether we can get back to that, whether we can place things in the proper order, so we can continue this really unbelievable and unprecedented time of peace and prosperity that we've enjoyed in this country. Nobody's got it better than us right now, today. I mean, it's never been better to be a person than in America right now. There's no other society in all of history. And so it's too bad. And I mean, obviously we've got all kinds of issues. That doesn't mean there's not issues to solve and there's not things that are concerning and all that stuff. Just like you were saying, there's always room for improvement. And so I think, obviously we want to keep doing that, but man, to be a little more content and a lot more appreciative.
I think we need to be a little bit more humble too, because I think sometimes there are people that are not people of faith that think that they're superior to people of faith, and there are people of faith that think they're superior to to people who are not people of faith. America is a melting pot. All right, we are made up of all kinds of different people. And we have to allow room for each other. The freedom of religion, for instance, is guaranteed in the Constitution. Now, fortunately, with Judeo-Christian values, you can also enjoy the freedom not to be a religious person.
Right.
But that doesn't come in other types of governments. If you are not of a certain persuasion in certain Middle Eastern countries, you can be, denied government services. You can be, prohibited from meeting in groups to practice your faith. You can also be beheaded in some faiths. So, again, getting back to the auditor's office, it shouldn't be, based on, service delivery based on the person's religion or their political party, but it serves all, just like the 911 committee did, was to make sure that everybody's needs with 911 were met.
Well, I think that's a good point, because a lot of times people that are politically ambitious will get into any kind of position and want to make it more than it is. And, and I think what you're talking about with the auditor's office is like, it's not something where you have to you shouldn't have to worry about what anybody's political leanings are, whether they're in the office or outside the office, because it's pretty straightforward. You're processing the work. It's like you're just ringing people up. Like the laws are the laws. There's not a lot of room for interpretation. And I think that, we talked with Tracy about this, with the sheriff's office, similar thing. It doesn't have anything to do with political stuff. There's so many things that have gotten politicized, like health, that's become a political thing. And it's like, why that shouldn't have anything to do with any political party. Like being healthy should be something that should be popular with everybody, across the board. And it shouldn't have anything to do with, whether somebody's a Democrat or Republican. If stuff works, we should get behind it. I keep saying this. I mean, I think, I probably would disagree with, John Fetterman on most things, but I really appreciate his ability to go, well, that thing's working, so I'm going to applaud it, even though it didn't come from our side of the aisle. And and for all the, stuff that, people have to say about Trump, one of the things I really appreciated that he's done is that, he's taken people like Tulsi Gabbard or RFK or other people who have always been Democrats and said, well, look, if you can produce results that most Americans want to see happen,
can you focus on this and make this a reality?
Yeah, just go get the job done, and, I hope as a whole voting public, we can get back to some of that stuff. In the state, we're very captured by this stuff, and you would hope that we could get to a place. so much of the stuff that happens that's happening in the legislative sessions right now is really concerning to people. I mean, all the time that I've lived here, I have not had so many people reach out to me concerned about whether they want to keep living here.
Mm-hmm.
I've
actually heard
this
it
week,
with some of my campaign conversations I've had with people.
I've had people reaching out to me, being like, "Hey, so what do you think about when is enough enough?" And it's like, man, I love this place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people. I was probably obnoxiously in love this place when I lived in New York. People were probably sick of hearing about how much better I thought it was here than over there. So I apologize.
Well, when I worked in
just
DC,
loved
it was the same thing.
Yeah, and I get that was probably annoying, so it's my bad. But I just loved it here, and I loved what I had as a kid, and to see some of that stuff slipping away, and to see the breakneck speed at which we are, driving towards the cliff, is frustrating. And a lot of these things seem to be driven not by almost not even by ideology, just a disdain for a specific politician, and just doing the exact opposite of whatever that guy wants to do. Even things that he wants to do that were historically Democrat policies and positions for a long time. So it's really interesting on one level, but it's I know it's discouraging a lot of people. And so, man, I don't know what it would take to get back to a place where we can look at things more, like you're talking, where it's more what's in the public interest, what's going to make people's day-to-day lives better, and less about whose team is winning. And we're going to have to try to find a way back to a spot where we all believe that we are on the same team. The things that I think are not what I am as a person all the time. The things that I think can change, but there's other parts of me that are less changing.
Well, I think the first step that we need to do is we need to bring balance back to our government, at the state level. We've had one-party rule for a very long time, and I'm not down on everything Democrat. There have been some good things that have been done, but I think that, the best times that Washington has been when there's been a balance of power, and then, let the process play out, and may the best idea win. I am humble enough to know that I don't have all the answers, and I'm willing to admit that I am not perfect. However, I also know that I'm a very diligent, tenacious person, and I seek the facts. I want to make decisions based on best available science and based on the data, because that's the safest place to be. When you've got the evidence to back up your position, that's what's best for the public. It's not always an ideological bend, and I'm as Republican as they come, but I also know that sometimes we've not made the best calls.
For sure.
And so we need to be willing to admit that and get back on the train, and let's get going down the tracks and trying to work together to finish this railroad. And we have a great country, and we are constantly building it. But I think that our foundation of this country was well laid, and there isn't a lot that needs to be fixed there. Okay, we can build upon the foundation that that we've been blessed with in this country. We don't have to take a wrecking ball to it. We need to build on that foundation, and form the more perfect union. Thomas Jefferson, incredible document that he wrote. That would be the last thing on my mind, would be to do anything to take away from that. But we do need to get everybody's focus on doing what's right for the public and not necessarily for our own silos. And I believe that we Republicans have a lot of great ideas, and that we need to be able to get them out there and to, back them up with best available science and data, and convince our friends on the other side of the aisle, to join us in that. And, if we can't, then perhaps maybe it's how we're delivering the message. There's got to be a reason why there's such a disconnect. And so I'm always willing to extend a hand to the other side. But again, getting back to the auditor's office, the most important thing is that, like we did on the 911 committee, is we keep the mission in our focus. And that's what we did in the Navy. There wasn't a Republican Navy and a Democrat Navy. We were the Navy. And when the president issued orders, all hands on deck were focusing on the mission. Yeah. And it wasn't an ideological thing as to, how we fire, this munition or that munition. We just fired the munition when we had to. We took care of the injured. We took care of people that needed our help. And, that's what I'm most proud about, is that kind of an example that I have had modeled to me and that I also want to be able to share with others. And so, that's what I'm planning to bring to the auditor's office.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about this. So you were talking about some of the laws that are being talked about in terms of elections. Mm-hmm. So walk me through how that works at a local level, and what the process, as you understand it, would look like. So let's say any president, no matter what it is, any president says, well, we are going to, at the federal level, going to require X for elections. Mm-hmm. From there, as you understand it, and how it would pertain to Washington State in particular, what does that look like, and how does it get down? What involvement would you have in any of that?
Well, that's a meaty question, and as I said, as it filters down to the local level, that's where we have to begin making our decisions and our changes from, until it gets down to us, and it comes to us from the state. There's no medium in place for the federal government to dictate to cities and counties how they'll run elections. Yeah, that would take a huge paradigm shift in our laws and our election setup. The government, but it has to come down from on high.
Yeah, and the federal government essentially would just make that directive to the states.
Basically.
And then the governor,
it usually involves
the
money. Anytime the government gives you money, there's strings attached.
Correct.
So that's their power. Okay. So
if you're a charity, keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Be careful about taking government money.
And if what they're willing to support, is in line with your mission, great, take advantage of the opportunity. If not, then don't take it, unless you're willing to compromise your values. But again, as I understand it, and I'm not a legislator, I'm not an expert, in the state. Okay. My silo has been, I was a government employee at the federal level. I was not a person to make policy, and so forth. And then, on city council, I helped manage a city, but then here at the county, I would be a manager of sorts, of a department, and the department receives its laws, or instructions basically from the state, the Secretary of State's office.
It's the Secretary of State that would dictate those things to you.
Yeah. And, it would be up to us to look and to receive and to look, and to evaluate the law with legal counsel and the best, counsel that I could gather with my staff and so forth, and the other auditors in the state, they have an association. They meet just like the Washington, Association of Counties does for county commissioners, and so forth. There's different groups. There's treasurer groups and so on and so forth.
Building officials, I know, all meet and they talk about these things.
Yeah, so you work with, with all the resources at hand, and then you would implement them, at the local level. You don't do it in a vacuum. It wouldn't be me taking a look at, any administration and congressionally passed laws to try to figure it out for myself. But there's a whole, process through the state, through, these associations, before it gets down to the local level. And then keep in mind, too, unless there's state funding involved, we are going to rely on the county commissioners for funding because our budget in the auditor's office comes from the county commissioners. And so, we don't have, a tax item on our property tax bills that funds the auditor's office. So our funds come from the county commissioners. And so whatever, we are required to implement, we're going to have to work with state and, county commissioner partners to come up with the funding in order to, to implement those things. So it's not anything that's, just willy-nilly done, and decisions made in a vacuum, but there is a lot of process involved, and I don't know all of them. I will admit that. I don't know anybody could unless you've sat in the position.
Yeah, no, that's generally the case.
But, I have been in a position with my federal career to be the, near the top of the food chain, in a major VA department, to implement veteran benefits, to a broad, array of veterans throughout the country and actually throughout the world. And we have to be able to deliver those services with, following the law and with the intent of Congress behind it and the American people. The same thing would be in anything else that you do. What is the intent of the administration? What trickles down to the state, the final passage of the legislation, what the state, takes out of it, and, what they come up with to implement the federal law if they want to keep the federal funding. If they don't want to keep the federal funding, the state can reject that and just keep things the way they are, the way I understand it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've seen some of that with New York, and, I follow some of that stuff because I still have a lot of people that I know and care about over there.
But there's usually an appetite for money, and so that causes people to move mountains, in order to get the money that they want. So we'll just have to wait and see what actually happens. I can't sit here and speculate. I have no idea if anything even gets passed.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious how that would flow down to here, and then if there's what levers are there for local government officials to be able to push back on anything that we don't feel like is advantageous for our area? Like what things actually can be done? Is it all handled through those associations essentially, and then
they are a huge voice, in
so
Olympia.
They would go make testimony on different items, or there's, I don't know. Do they have a lobby?
Yes, they do.
Yeah,
and there's there's also the power of the citizen's voice. I mean, we have an issue right now before the legislature. The income tax. And there's 116,000 people. I think I've recently heard in the media. I don't know if I've got the best.
Well, it is the largest in history. I've heard
it is the largest in Washington history.
So far, what I've seen, they don't care at all.
Well, I'm going to reserve judgment because I don't know the the intents, but it can appear that way.
Well,
I'll agree with you
I've
there.
I've heard some of the testimony. Yeah. It's pretty discouraging to hear kind of their thoughts on. Yeah. They're like, well, we don't really take that into consideration when we're doing these things.
I'm 66 years old, and I've never seen a tax just literally evaporate and go away, and I've never seen one go down significantly, if at all. And so my concern is what we call the slippery slope, perspective. Once you start something, it's probably here to stay. And if we do get an income tax on millionaires, then and I've said this in social media postings and so forth, all they have to do is redefine what it means to be a millionaire, and then eventually what it means to be rich, and then what it means to be well off, and then what it means to be middle class. And pretty soon everybody's going to be paying it. And it would have been nice if the legislature would have passed the amendment that was produced to limit this income tax to millionaires only. But
that's going to have a serious drawback. I mean, they're experiencing some of this stuff, in New York. I obviously know a little bit about what's gone on there, and so I mean. The process is so predictable. Mm-hmm. I really hope that people can look at this objectively, and go, it's if anytime you want to try to take more money from whoever you consider more wealthy than you, because it's you have freedom of movement. And if you have those kinds of resources, I mean, we saw this when Amazon was going to build something, and I think it was in Brooklyn, and they had options, and the New York government AOC was a big part of this at the time, before she was a little more well known. But they basically said, well, we're not going to give you any kinds of breaks or any kinds of help or any kind of anything. Well, it's just like, if you have a free agent in sports, they're not going to go to a team that doesn't want them there. Mm-hmm. They've got options. They can go to, if you're the top free agent, you can go to any team you want.
Yeah.
And so you pick, who's going to give you the most support, who's going to pay you the most money. Mm-hmm. All those kinds of things are part of it. And so Amazon left and took all the jobs and all the tax revenue and everything with it. They just decided not to do it. And so, I think a lot of times politicians who think in terms of, taxing the rich, quote unquote, forget that the rich don't have to be there. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's some stuff that came out today that I saw that they are fully intending on passing this income tax. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit, Ferguson talked a little bit, I think yesterday, about they weren't going to do it this year at all. Mm-hmm. And the thing I heard today was that it's probably going through Monday. Mm-hmm. So, the issue is that when you start taxing people, and there's already a bunch of AI tech companies that said they're going to move or not come. Mm-hmm. Starbucks is already building a headquarters in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Amazon is already making plans to be out. So you remove all that revenue and all those jobs. It just, what do you think is going to happen? If you don't have to be here and pay all that extra, why would you do it? So all those people will leave. I mean, I know so many people in New York that essentially, were able to buy very, very nice homes somewhere else and have it fully paid for by the tax savings.
Yeah.
It didn't cost them a penny to leave. And so you're going to have a wealth flight. We're already seeing, you can track the U-Haul numbers, which I always think is really interesting. We saw this in New York too. I remember, I feel like I'm reliving the reason why we left there. And, we've already got an exodus happening. Anecdotally, we all know people who are like, I'm not going to do it anymore. And so all that's leaving, but the budget's going to remain the same. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to have to come back down. And, you saw this with Mom Donnie recently. He said everything was going to be free, and we're like 6 weeks or 8 weeks into this thing. He's like, well,
can you help shovel your own streets for us?
Andy's going to raise property taxes 10% on a state that the property taxes are in an area where the property taxes are already crazy. Yeah. So if you don't think it's coming for you eventually, it's just that I and again, it's not I don't want this to come across as a partisan thing. It's a human nature thing, and it's the way that money flows. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like one thing that we consistently miss, and I think this kind of goes back to what our spiritual focus is. I think the grave mistake we end up making is that we believe that humans are innately good, and that human nature is innately good. And so it kind of colors everything else that we think. But most of our problems politically seem to come from this humanist view that, all things being equal, people will tend to do the right thing. That's exactly the opposite. And if we're all being honest with ourselves, we know this about us. I know this about me.
I've raised two beautiful daughters, okay, and I never once did I have to get after them for being so good.
Right.
You know, I've never, you need to quit being so good and, at least go over there and, slap your sister once in a while, because that's, no, we're teaching our children how to properly behave. Okay, yeah. And that's what that's what human nature is. There are no signs on the freeway that say you need to drive faster. Okay,
There might need to be. Have you been on the road?
Oh, I
lately?
I have.
Yeah, that may be a thing.
I've driven many states.
No, I know.
I've driven cross country, and I've never ever found a sign that says you need to go faster. It's always to curtail the natural inclination to want to go faster, right?
Yeah.
That seems to be the normal thing. Now we suppress that, and we say, you know what? As a law-abiding citizen, I'm going to drive 70, on the 70-mile-an-hour zones, and watch out for those that are not driving as fast, or even those that are driving faster. But it's we have to restrain our natural impulses, and many times, they are not necessarily always good, and. But on the other hand, too, I think once a person comes to adulthood and they really solidify in their moral compass, they actually do, better than what they would have in their childhood. I think people do get better in time, with the right,
hopefully, yeah,
with the right, stimulus, with the right consequences for bad behavior. That the potential is there for all of us to excel and to go beyond, our. I heard a friend of mine years ago in Seattle say, sometimes if it wasn't for my stinking thinking, it all starts here. It all starts here. And if we can, if we can deal with this and this, then I think the human potential is off the charts. But the problem is, there's greed. Oh man, if I just fudge on this a little bit, maybe I can get this big thing over here, and we get our eyes and our focus on the wrong things. And so that's what eventually drives our behavior.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
But just understanding that is the natural tendency. That's what left alone, that's what we all will gravitate to. We don't actively have to learn. Just like you're saying, you never have to teach your kid how to say no. They say it, they say it all the time when they're little, and you have to teach them to stop doing that. You have to teach them how to be good. And so, the idea that people left to their own devices are always going to choose the better option is just, it's crazy, and it doesn't work. And so, we end up in all these ridiculous positions because we're banking on, we talked about this a lot, that, Thomas Sowell said, talks about how everything is really revolves around incentive structures. And I think one of the things that we've done a poor job politically over the last, I don't know how many years, I guess I would say, but for a while, is that we believe that we don't need to have the incentive structures designed in a way that will force everybody, whether they're morally good or not, to be incentivized to produce the best outcomes. We just kind of leave that open. And so I think for politicians to, I think, guide this thing more successfully is that you'd be much better served having incentive structures that incentivize you to do the right things and have bad people in those systems, like morally not good people, will do good things if the incentive structure is set up properly.
Well,
I
can see that.
You don't want to put yourself in a position where everybody who runs a company or, runs an arm of the government or runs a charity or anything has to be good on their own for it to turn out well, for them to make the right choices. We're just asking for trouble, especially, this is another thing that I think we discount a lot now is that, I don't think we realize how successful this American thing is, historically and currently. And that anytime you get a concentration of resources, you're going to attract all of the scavengers. Jordan Peterson talks about this. But, when a whale dies in the ocean, you have all of a sudden, fish just will swim around for days and years just trying to get just enough to stay alive, and they're eating. But you get a whale that dies and drops to the bottom of the ocean. I mean, I love nature documentaries, but you know, all of a sudden, from miles and miles and miles around, like every type of thing that that eats that will show up, and all the scavengers come out. And so, you know, America is essentially like the whale that died in the middle of the ocean. It's like there is a all of a sudden in the historical landscape, there was a gigantic concentration of resources that is America, and for a lot of different reasons. So I think you have to expect, because of human nature, that you have to be on guard for scavengers to infiltrate those things. I mean, it's just like, you know, those, you always have these issues with, you know, pedophiles being, you know, Boy Scout leaders or teachers or coaches and things like that. It's not because people who are teachers and coaches and Boy Scout leaders tend to be pedophiles. It's that when you have a concentration of kids, you will draw people who want to be around kids, right? And so they will try to infiltrate those things in order to achieve that stuff. So we have those kinds of things happening with government. There's so much money, and we don't do a very good job of understanding that, you know, keeping watch at the gate. You know what I'm saying? And just going, well, we really have to make sure that people who are coming in here and the incentives attached to it guard against a scavenger infiltrating the purse or infiltrating the organization, somebody who doesn't mean to do well.
I can understand what you're saying. I also like to look at it, though, as our lives are interdependent upon each other. You know, that whale that dies, you know, at the bottom of the, you know, and falls to the bottom of the sea, you know, they've lived their life, you know, and produced offspring, you know, to perpetuate the species. And then, you know, even in their demise, you know, they feed the rest of, you know, the animal kingdom, okay,
Right.
and they benefit others. And I think, you know, the human condition should I think also reflects the same thing. You know, my life is lived to the very best that I can, and then, you know, and as I serve others, you know, I'm giving of my sustenance to others and doing something good for them. At the same time, they're doing good things for me, you know, and our relationships, I think, should be more thought of as symbiotic, you know, rather than, you know, winners and losers, you know, and you know, I know that there's that element in there. There's the greed, there's, you know, wrong motivations and so forth. But I honestly believe that there are a lot of good intentions that people have, and because of the stimuli that you were talking about earlier, sometimes they, you know, their focus, instead of, you know, on the right values of the mind and the heart, you know, they get sidetracked, you know, in the wrong direction. Perhaps maybe somebody who does have a bent, you know, towards a bad behavior, you know, given certain stimuli, they react, you know, they're not strong in that area. You know, and so that's why we need each other. You know, as a brother, you know, you should be able to speak into my life and, you know, and help me with, you know, maybe weaknesses that I might have, I with you, and, you know, we can encourage each other to provide that stimuli that will encourage us towards good things. You know, I think of people in the community. Nobody, you know, starts out in life says, you know what, I want to be addicted to meth. Right. You know, I want to be, you know, an alcoholic. I want to be, you know, an abuser. I want to be. No, nobody starts off thinking that way. But, you know, due to, you know, horrible things that happen to people and maybe associating with the wrong people, they get the wrong stimuli. They, you know, get enticed, you know, introduced into bad behaviors. That's a natural, you know, progression. And I think we need to rise above those natural progressions, and we need to, you know, I think, honestly, call upon God, call upon my brothers and sisters, you know, in the faith to help me walk the walk, you know, rather than just talk the walk, and, you know, and then vice versa. So in the ministry, I have worked with, you know, people in that regard. I have helped prevent people from, you know, from committing suicide. I have consoled the mother who has lost a child, to a horrible car accident. I mean, I have seen some of the worst in humanity, but at the same time, from the worst of conditions, I've also seen the best of humanity come forth, and so my whole life has driven me towards that goal, is to bring out the best in people, to value everybody, even if they're of a different, political persuasion than I am. Serving each other, I think, is the greatest cause of Christ that we could ever, choose to emulate. Loving our brother as ourself. The greatest commandment is that you love one another. Those are I think, the highest callings that we as people can have. And I've always done that, not only in my ministry work, but also in my public service work. And that's what I bring to, my campaign, the auditor's office. And I'm not going to say, that this isn't also the same motivation as to the people that are also running for auditor. I just want to, emphasize, who I am. And if you vote for me, that, this is what you're getting. You're getting the real me. I don't, live one life on the planning commission and another life at home. I don't live, one life at home and then I act like something different when I go to church. I am me. And, I have a love and a respect for all people. And, that's why I serve. I've given hours weekly for 7 years to Lewis County. And I'll continue doing that if I don't get elected. That's not going to change me and who I am. And if I can do that in such a way that encourages somebody else to step up and join the planning commission, somebody else to step up and, help with broadband, or, step up and, somebody else can help fill a need, with our law enforcement and public safety people, then I think that would be my greatest accomplishment, if I can inspire others to do good for others.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm doing this. If the voters choose to elect me, this is what I will give. If they choose not to, hey, I will still love, I will still serve, and bring my skills to bear wherever the opportunities are open to do so.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I think I'm going to shift gears here in a minute, but
Okay.
I think that's when we're talking about what we're talking about, I think there's, and I think you articulated it well. But just to kind of clarify some of the stuff I was talking about is that I think there are different roles for the individual than the government.
Mm-hmm.
I think on individual levels, I've talked to several people about this, when it comes to immigration, law. There's, you see this happen in real time where, there are the same groups of people that typically are in favor of enforcing immigration law are also the same groups of people who will be there at those border places running nonprofits to help the individuals that come through on a human level. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that it's an important distinction for us to understand, is that the government has one set of priorities, and the government should handle things based on laws. But individuals are free to take care of people in a different kind of way.
Well, this is where I was talking about with the different institutions that God created.
100%. And I think,
they all need to be in full operation in their realm.
So it's not intellectually dishonest to say, for somebody to say, well, I think, that people, or that we should make sure that the people who are here legally. Mm-hmm. But then also to go, if somebody was not here legally and they were hungry or they needed assistance or they needed help even getting to a legal status with the rules that are in place, you can walk and chew gum in the same mind frame on that, I think. Yeah. And I think that's where, when we kind of oversimplify all this stuff and say, well, this is a Democrat position or this is a Republican position. I mean, we've talked about this where, if the Republicans had different, changed all their policies, I wouldn't vote for them. Or if, and I know Democrats that think the same way, that are, in process of that now, where they're like, well, things that that we used to be on the same page with the Democrat Party, they're not there anymore. So I'm just going to go a different direction, whether it's a third party or voting for Republican or not voting at all. I mean, I've kind of heard all the different arguments on that, but I couldn't possibly care less what the name of the party is. Yeah. It's like, are the things going to work for people? Are they going to be, things that will advance individuals' lives and the country, and all the rest of it. I mean, we all know. I mean, my grandma, at the end of her life, we talked about this, where they always voted Democrat up to a certain point, back when things were much more similar. Like the parties were much more similar.
Conservative. Yeah, when Democrats were more conservative.
Yeah, and then at a point, she switched over because they just had gone in a different direction. And so I think, getting back to where we're more in love with ideas than, colors, reds and blues, like, who cares? Like, we need to get good ideas and good leaders who will implement the best idea they can find from anybody.
Some may not like this, but my honest opinion is that, Republicans, we honestly believe that what we're doing and providing and offering the public is good. And I believe that there are Democrats that feel the same way.
Oh, absolutely.
I am convinced that, when I served in the Navy, like I said earlier, we weren't doing our jobs, the Democrat way or the Republican way. We were doing our jobs. And I think that, honestly, most Democrats are doing what they honestly, truly feel is the right thing, just like the Republicans do.
Yeah.
And there are extremes in both parties. My goal is that most Americans in that middle 80% is where reality is.
Yeah, it really is an 80-20 proposition a lot of the time. And I think we don't give enough credence to that.
It really is. And I want to make sure that the Democrats know that I am not anti-Democrat.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. I am not, to the exclusion of all the Democrats, 100%. Now, I believe in the Republican values, without a doubt.
Right.
Okay, and I can articulate those, but I believe that the positions that we have, are good for the people, good for the country. But we have to also consider that others don't feel that way, and if we can't communicate the message well enough to get them on board, or vice versa, if you're coming from the other side, if you can't convince the people from the other side, to your viewpoint, this is the real job of the parties, is to raise up good leaders that are effective in bringing people together. Because the last I recall, the founding of our country, was not based on party. It was all Americans came together in the 13 colonies, and we started a country.
Yeah.
And
with a lot of arguing.
With a lot of arguing.
I mean, if you haven't,
but they didn't turn on each other.
Yeah, they had the Federalist Papers. They also had the Anti-Federalist Papers.
The enemy was overseas. The enemy wasn't within. And see, this is what I see too often, is that, we have what we call in the Republican Party, a very large tent, and we have lots of diverging opinions on things in the Republican Party. I can only assume that the same thing happens, on the Democratic side. So we're not a mono-party. Neither party is a mono-party.
No.
But, in order for our current political system to work, we have to have the two-party system, and so, every so many years, we have our conventions and we hammer out our platform, and they do the same thing. And, and then together, we, I hate to call it this, but, the competitive field, is in the political realm where, you have to hammer these things out, and somebody has to win. That's the way our system is set up. Even in government contracting, it's a competitive environment to get a government contract. You're bidding against, other companies that are vying for the same business. The government in this case, the contracting officer, like I was the judge. You decide which bid is best for the government. It's not always the cheapest. It's what brings the best value to the government. Those are the criteria. In the business world, it's typically, cheapest price wins. But it's, but again, you have to work through that whole process to get an outcome.
Yeah, there's like an old sales saying that says, price is only an issue in the absence of value. And so I think it is, I used to talk to people because I've done a lot of sales over the years. And, one of the things that you talk to people about is well, when you went to go buy your house, did you buy the absolute cheapest house you could find? How many people do you know that nobody's ever done that? They didn't go buy the absolute cheapest house they could find. It was based on a whole list of things that they were balancing out to get the most house for the money that they had to spend. And, same thing with your car. Like, nobody goes and buys the cheapest car.
Well, some people do. I've known people that are that frugal, and tight. All I need is just something to get me from here to there. My dad used to tell me, when he encouraged me to buy this 69 Plymouth Fury, he said, it's only $600. The thing backfired and it weaved all over the road. It was a boat, and I hated the car, but I bought it because I was convinced that all I needed was transportation to get me from school to work, and back home again, and that's how we started out. We started out living within our means, obviously, and then as life got better for us and we worked hard to earn what we had, then did we start going into debt. But even then we had to make sure that is this practical, is this what we
but it's in a sliding scale of value, and so people are always willing to pay more if the value's there, if it's going to make a meaningful impact. And so, I think that's the case. And, to piggyback off your other point, I actually would go as far as to say, like, I don't think that it's healthy for anything to have just one side's opinion. I don't,
Absolutely.
I don't think this state would, people are probably going to hate this too, but I don't think any state is long term going to be in the best position it can be in. Even if we had Republicans on every single thing, I think it's always bad to let any organization, no matter what it is, think that they're doing everything right. Just think, we're all married here. We need our wives to have a difference of opinion, even when we come to a decision that, if we go back and forth on something. I can't. I'm sure we can all think of many times, but like where I had a certain opinion, we're going to do a thing, we went back and forth on it, even if we still did the thing that I had that I had thought of first, let's say, I drastically would change aspects of it, or we would go about it differently based on the input, and vice versa. There's times where I've just totally changed what I thought based on, my wife's perspective. And so, I think it's important to have a differing perspective, but I think the secret sauce of that working is like you're saying, we have to value each other. And that's kind of that's the kind of the secret sauce of the marriage relationship, right? It's like, you have to understand that there's totally different sensibilities coming to the table when a husband and wife get together, or and you have to have enough humility to go, what, I don't know everything, I need this perspective, even if my inclinations are mostly right. I need this perspective to make the most effective decision for our whole family. And so we have to understand that, I agree. I don't think that Democrats are the enemy.
Right.
I think you have to have both. And so, but we've got this polarization especially on the coastal states. Well, it might be. I haven't lived in interior too much, but it's very like, we want to eradicate, the other opinion, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't think any of us. I don't think any of us actually want that. I think there's a lot of people that think they want that, but I don't think the result of that is something they actually want. I think it's really important. I mean, there's all these, the famous stories of Reagan and Tip O'Neill, politically, going after each other and hammering out these ideas, and then afterwards they go have a drink and be friends and be friendly and. I think that kind of mentality is important. That as people, there's the name of the book's escaping me, but there's a book about when we use dehumanizing terminology to describe other people, and I mean we're all guilty of it from time to time, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But when that becomes the norm or the dominant way of framing your opponents is to say that they're evil. That's a really terrible way to go. It really shuts down all the good ideas that can come out of that collaboration, even if it's abrasive collaboration. I mean, I know a bunch of people who are, who would I would say are pretty liberal, but as people, we can get along. We can talk about stuff, and most of the people that I know that are like that, we can talk about these things without getting in some, catastrophic argument. It doesn't have to be personal.
And when it gets personal, that's when I start saying, okay, wait a minute, okay,
Right.
I don't mind, you making your point and I'm wrong, and me making my point and you're wrong, but when you start, accusing me of being, the evil,
whatever,
whatever.
Well, and I think,
that's where I draw the line, But I have, very good Democrat friends, in my life, and I want them to, to tell me, how they're perceiving, the way I'm presenting myself.
Yeah, and
because they can sometimes provide an insight that can help me more than some of my friends who believe and talk alike and like the Patty Duke show,
Yeah.
and
well, it's hard for good ideas to come out of an echo chamber. It just unless it gets beat up some, your idea's no good.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good clue for any of us, when we're having a conversation, if you start to resort to you're dumb, you're evil, you're whatever, that your idea is no good.
Yeah.
And I think it's good for all of us to recognize that, if it gets to that point, like your idea should be good enough to stand on its own, or your philosophy should be good enough to stand on its own.
Yeah.
If you find yourself in a position where you're going, well, I can't talk to you about this because you're evil or you're stupid.
Or you're just a conservative, or you're just a liberal.
Right. That's how your idea sucks, and you need to come up with a better one, because you've run out of room on the runway, or you need to go, we need to go back and research it. But it's a good indicator, if you're not willing to be able to talk it through with somebody. I mean, there's that famous quote of, I think it was Spurgeon. They asked him how how do you defend the gospel? And he says, I defend the gospel the same way I defend a lion. I just let it out of its cage. It's, if your ideas aren't, like that, where you don't have to defend them, you just release them into the wild, and they should be able to fend for themselves. And if they can't, great.
Yeah.
It wasn't a good enough idea. And I think if we can come to these kinds of things, instead of saying like, well, I'm going to support anything a Republican does. Well, I definitely don't do that.
We need independent thinkers, and that's
or I support anything a Democrat does, or I'm just going to vote for D's no matter what, or I'm just going to vote for R's no matter what. It's like, I get that everything's pretty charged right now, and it's hard to see how you could. I get on both sides. I hear people talk about this. It's hard to imagine voting for the other side or whatever, and we're starting to see more people want to be independent because of this, and which I don't know how that plays out politically, but I think it. I don't know, but it'd take somebody a lot smarter than me to figure that out. But
I've been a Republican all my life, but it has never ever been a time in my life where I've hated Democrats. That they are of a different persuasion, and my job is to try to understand. And like I said on the 911 committee, it wasn't didn't run that, as a partisan gig. That was strictly, mission focused. Just like when I was in the Navy, didn't matter what your label was. We all got aboard and we accomplished the mission. The auditor's office is the same thing. You might come into the office as a Democrat, but you know what? I'll treat you with the same courtesy, that I would a fellow Republican, and will bend over backwards to make sure that you're taken care of just as well, as one of my fellow Republicans. Labels don't have any place in the auditor's office. And I was in conversation with a Democrat friend of mine, and I told him basically this. I said, the auditor's office really is a nonpartisan office. It shouldn't be run as a partisan office. And he said, why don't you run as an independent? And I get that question every once in a while, and so I'm going to say it here on the show.
Yeah.
Because I want the world to know that, the values that make me who I am, first of all, come from my faith, my family, and then, yes, I hold to the values that are stated in the platform of the Republican Party. That makes me who I am. But it does not give me license to hate on somebody else who might believe in different ways than I do. If I would have been called to battle when I served in the U.S. Navy, I wouldn't have died just for the Republicans. Okay, I would have laid down my life for my fellow Democrats as well. And again, we were people of all persuasions in the service. We kept the mission at hand, and that's what the auditor's office needs to do. There's a scripture in the Bible that says to love justice. To do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with God. And that has probably been one of my life's mottos, is to do justly, to live an honorable life, and to express mercy, helping people who are of lower means, maybe not on a successful track in life, and try to help them in their lives become more successful, more fruitful, for themselves, for their families, and so forth. And then to walk humbly with God, knowing that He is the ultimate when it comes to my value system. Do I make mistakes? Yes, but I get up again and I try again. I repent and try to get right with, stay right with God, to share the gospel where I can, but most of all to serve my fellow man. And it starts with my faith, my family, and extends into all the work that I do. And am I perfect? I will say it again. No, absolutely not. But you'll never. I don't think you'll. I'll put my intentions right up there with anybody else's, that I really truly do try to do the very best that I can to serve others and to live honorably. And so, that's where I'm at, and I hope that it's come through loud and clear to the public, and to serve with integrity. That's what I will do. Yeah.
Well, that seems like a pretty good place to end it. I don't know if I could end it. I mean, there's a lot more I'd love to get into with this. So if maybe after this thing's over, come back on, because I'd love to talk to you a lot more about the flood stuff. I'd love to talk to you a lot more about, you have a position with, what are you doing with you have a Republican Party thing that you're a part of, is that right? Locally?
Oh, you're talking about the Conservative Coalition?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there was a season in which there was a lot of people feeling disenfranchised, at the local party level, and I tried not to get too bogged down in that, because again, like I said, we're an open tent. We have a very broad array of people, in the party, and while some of us were being labeled as rhinos, Republicans in name only. It just made sense that we would form some kind of a group that would provide a place where we could get together and fellowship with each other. There was absolutely no intent, because it's not legal, to form another party. We weren't trying to form another Republican Party or to take over the Republican Party. And right now, it's actually formally become a social group, where we get together, we're like-minded people. We are friends with each other, but many of us are still engaged fully with the Republican Party. There's no, lingering animosities and stuff like that. We're trying to continue to build and upon our new leadership. Greg Rohr and his team are doing a great job. And, but my whole involvement with the Conservative Coalition was not to separate and bring division to the party, to provide a meaningful place for people of like-mindedness to be able to fellowship together, and to encourage them to reintegrate into the party and to influence them. We have several people in our group that are PCOs. And so
what is that?
A precinct committee officer.
Okay.
So elected at the local precinct level to represent, the party, or to represent your precinct to the party of your choice. So I was elected to be the PCO for Forest Precinct.
Yeah.
And then I don't recall if there's a Democrat counterpart, but they have the ability to elect a Democrat to represent the same neighborhood to the Democratic Party. So that's the grassroots level of party affiliation, is at the precinct level. I will say, as a side note, when I was in Oregon, Oregon's not a precinct-based party system. They're just a primary state. So basically all you do there is, you can voluntarily associate with the party, but, the precinct level doesn't exist. And so really all they do in Oregon is, you vote in the primary, according to your chosen party, and you register as a according to your party in Oregon, but we don't here in Washington. Honestly, as a personal note, I have no problem registering as a Republican if that should ever, become the case here in Washington. But, we're a very independent state, independent minded. We don't want to register, and I respect that and I get it. And I'm not going to push, to changing it. But, I have no problem standing up and saying I'm a Republican. And I've had a lot of people tell me, if I ever were to change and try to become a Democrat, it would look so fake, because they know me so well, and that they would respect me less. If I tried to change my title or my affiliation for, short-term political gain, and, that's not going to happen. But I will go the extra mile to make sure that the Democrats are valued, respected, and their opinions heard, and which we've demonstrated on the Planning Commission. We didn't take any testimony based on party, but we heard people from varying differing opinions, didn't we?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of different opinions on the
Planning Commission.
It's one of the things I do like about it is that, I think we all know where we would lean, but we've never talked about it. Yeah. And it's irrelevant because we're just there to solve issues and try to get things, down, consolidated down to the best idea we can come up with.
And you've seen me lead the meetings. That sometimes the citizens that came out in huge numbers were, some very contentious issues. But you saw how I respected every single person there, no matter what their view was on any given topic. And I led the commission meetings the same way with us commissioners. And once the decisions are made, we are absolutely united together. There might be, a rare case where we have one voting, opposite the rest. But generally speaking, by the time we've gone through our process, and heard and valued everybody's opinions, and we come to a decision together, then we rally around that together, and that's what we pass on to the county commissioners. Yeah. By the time they've gotten it, we have done an awful lot of the flushing out that needs to take place, and that's a very good feeling to be a part of something like that, bringing people together from so many different sides. This short-term rental issue, that was probably one of our biggest contentious issues besides the YMCA issue. But, we had a pretty strong showing from the community when we did our initial outreach, or community development did their initial outreach and formed the first citizen group out in Packwood. And they gave us a lot of very valuable input, and so we started down the track of implementing what they were recommending, because we thought that we were hearing from a broad spectrum of people out in Packwood. And once word got out that we had a package of proposals that we were talking about, all of a sudden it was like lighting a match to gasoline. And somebody got concerned about what we were doing, And so that it ignited a whole nother set of, people to be vocal about, what was going on. And so, as I basically, after hearing everybody's testimony, I said, okay, wait a minute, we need to back off on all this, and we need to come up with a different solution.
Yeah.
And that's when I proposed the short-term rental committee idea. And it was absolutely accepted and by the people out in East County. And we had people volunteering, during their public testimony. I want to be a part of this, and stuff. And so we've recently made our selections, recommendations, I guess, to the county commissioners as to who should be on that committee. And, I think it's great because, it shows the character of our whole planning commission is that we weren't just tunnel visioned in one particular set of ideas, but when it came to us, we were willing to incorporate the other. And that's when we completely shifted gears and we came up with this new idea that's being implemented now. And, I think, if you were to label, the two groups, Republicans and Democrats, I think it's showing the best that we can do by bringing everybody to the table and saying, let's hammer this out together, because together we're stronger. And the more we divide, the weaker we get. Yeah. And so I am totally committed to this idea of bringing everybody to the table.
Yeah. So on that note, since we're kind of getting into it a little bit, what can the Republican Party do in Washington to bring a higher level of representation? Because in talking to people, I get the feeling that the Republican voters are discouraged to a point where they don't register and vote to the level that they could. And
well, the Washington voters in general, when we had 30% voter turnout in this last election, and then we passed a school district levy, up in Centralia by 16 votes, with a 30% voter turnout. There's voter apathy on all sides, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely appalling, that it be that way. You try to take away our right to vote, and everybody will come out and vote.
Yeah. So do you think that's a function of just not being excited about who's available to vote for? Or do you think it's, they just don't think that there's any possible way for, especially on the, I would say on the Republican side in this state, that they just don't think it's even possible to win an election?
I'm not in a position to characterize that, but the thing that I do hear from people, and I try to be data driven and focused on the appropriate information at hand, and the thing that I hear most from people is my vote doesn't count.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is incumbent upon all auditors, and the state Secretary of State's office, to assure people that, yes, their votes do count. And I keep going back to elections since I've lived in Lewis County where measures have passed or failed by mere handfuls of votes.
Oh, yeah. In this county, it's crazy. I mean, we had the Centralia superintendent on right before, I think we had we had 3,500 views on that, in that just few days, right before that. And crazy for stuff to pass by 16 votes is crazy. But
I
think
know
on
people that really worked hard on that,
Yeah.
and yet on our 911 committee, Jay, I didn't mean to interrupt, but on our 911 committee, we passed that measure with 80% of the vote.
Yeah.
Whatever percentage showed up to vote, we got 80% of that.
Yeah.
So it does show that we can do it.
Yeah. So as auditor, then, is there anything that the auditor's office does to try to help drive voter participation across the board? Or is it just, what kind of things can, from that position, and then just not being an auditor, just speaking as a citizen, is there, do you know what the numbers are, what it would take for, I know one thing that every time the governorship comes up, there's always this, maybe, a Republican or an independent could get in, and kind of steers at least towards the middle some. And we've talked a little bit about just having, an incrementalist approach to politics. I think when we get so ideological, a lot of times,
it's an all or nothing.
Yeah, I think
I'd rather have a little than nothing.
Yeah,
and then
you can have part of something or all of nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I feel that's one thing. I've talked to so many people about this, but I know we've talked about it a little bit. Just that sometimes in the Republican Party in this state, it seems like they get so enamored with who's the most conservative, and then there's a lot of fighting about that we end up sending out 15 different candidates, and the vote gets split up so many ways that nobody's got a shot to win. And so how does as a conservative, what would it look like, do you think, for the Republican Party to try to figure out how to get a more consolidated option for people who maybe don't, because and I hadn't actually thought about that in this state, but it sounds like the Democrats are not all that psyched about their options either. They're not turning out to vote in high levels. So, what do you do? Just as what would you say to voters, I guess, to try to encourage people to just go out and vote for somebody who represents your interests, no matter whether you think they're going to win or not?
Well, Get Out the Vote is a major initiative of the Republican Party, and I'm sure it is with the Democratic Party, too. There's countless resources that go into trying to get out the vote, and I know elected officials all up and down the ticket, encourage people to get out and vote. And, I, as a PCO, have done that at my precinct level, and I think that, it's an all of the above, all hands on deck approach.
Yeah.
It takes all of us, sitting across the table, having dinner and talking to, your spouse or, guests that you're having over, making sure people, understand the importance of voting and that every vote does matter. And, if you don't vote, then your vote definitely doesn't count, and it may not always go the way that you would have wanted it to if you would have voted. So to me, we've tried to make voting so easy in this state, and it's mind-blowing to me why people can't, put a check mark in a box or color in the circle, stick it in an envelope or two, and then drop it in a drop box someplace. If you can't drop it in a drop box someplace, a ballot, box someplace, can you at least stick it in your mailbox, for crying out loud?
Do you think that's part of the issue, that people don't view it as a valuable act because we've made it so easy?
I don't think so, for this reason, because there was low voter turnout before vote by mail, and vote by mail was supposed to be...
It's just never been good.
This great idea to try to make it easier for people to vote, and it would incentivize people to vote more, and there's when I was a kid, I wasn't interested in civics, okay?
Yeah, I wasn't.
It wasn't
either.
until I became an adult that I started getting interested in civics and wished I would have taken a class on civics.
Yeah.
So, it starts in the school, I think, making the classes interesting enough where people understand the value. I do remember taking a class field trip to Olympia when I was a kid. I thought this was awesome. This was so neat, And that, coupled with people that have been an example in my life, has inspired me to public service. Has really made me a committed voter. I don't recall missing more than just a few elections my entire adult life. I've always voted. When I was in the Navy, I voted by mail because it was allowed then, for service members serving outside of their home areas. I don't know if there is a magic bullet. I will say, however, when a really dynamic candidate comes along, to run for, high office like president, attracts a certain, it's a draw. Dino Rossi, brought a lot of, Republican voters, to, and we nearly had a Republican governor in Dino Rossi. Ended up being Christine Gregoire, and I'm not going to relitigate past elections. It is what it is. All we can do is start now. And, what I've seen in the past is voter apathy. but I don't think we've identified exactly what the ticking bomb is. What makes people, decide, oh, well, I'm going to quit not voting and I'm going to start voting, and do so consistently. I don't know what that magic bullet is. All we can do is use whatever bully pulpit we have in whatever position we have in life. You own and run a company, so I'm sure that you're probably encouraging your
Well, I don't
your
own it,
staff.
just for the record.
Okay. Run a company,
Yeah.
and so you're encouraging your employees to go out and vote. And I had a boss in Seattle when I worked for a two-way radio company. He gave us time off to vote during the day from work. Didn't need to because or get off early, and go to the polling place, and I would take advantage of that and vote. So there are incentives that people can do wherever they are in life. A wife can encourage her husband who might not be working, or vice versa. I'll watch the kids while you go vote, that type of thing. Or, here's the envelope. I'll open it for you. You sit down and vote. If you have any questions, ask me and we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
You put it in the secrecy envelope and I'll stick it in the outer envelope. You sign it and then I'll drop it in the mailbox for you. Whatever we have to do to help each other vote.
Yeah.
I think is what we need to do. And until we can identify the gene that makes people not vote, there's no gene therapy that'll that I know of that'll fix it.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I mean, any kind of change that you want to see happen, it's really about, those of us that are motivated and want to lead the people that are around us, in a servant manner. I think you just influence the guy next to you or the girl next to you and go, hey, if you that's one thing I do. If people start complaining about politics, that's one of the first things I ask them is if they voted. Yeah. And if they say no, and I go, well, you don't get to talk to me about this stuff. Go vote, and then we'll talk about it.
True, but it's harsh. But it's true.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm half joking, obviously, but it's like, don't complain to me if you're not gonna, not gonna be part of, doing what. And it's the one thing we can do. Yeah. We can vote. It's the most powerful. We can vote with our dollars when we go out and spend money, and we can vote with our with the vote that we have, and it's just important to do. And I think we're talking about this. I think I don't know where this number came from, but I think you were saying if there was like if you had 80% turnout from either party, you'd win in a landslide. In this state too. So I think it's important for people, in any state, if you feel like, your way, your side never wins an election, it's probably a voter turnout issue. And I think, I think that's important for conservatives to hear, especially on the east side of the state, where they feel, I hear this a lot lately, that people just feel like they get treated like they're not even part of the state because they're on the other side of the mountains. But I think, I hear that from people in this county that they don't feel represented. And, so, you gotta, I think it's important that people understand that it's highly possible. Any party could win any state, I think, if the turnout was there. And it doesn't even have to be 100%. Some states it might not have to be that high at all.
And I think both parties, really need to work on trying to, reach the independents, the non-aligned people, to vote their way, to vote with them. Yeah. Because obviously there's going to be people like me you're going to have a hard time convincing to vote Democrat, and vice versa. There'll be people that are Democrats that'll be hard pressed to come up with a reason to vote for Republican. So really the battlefield, if you were to use a military terminology, the battlefield is that middle swath of people that are independent, and they will go either way. And again, that comes down to messaging on either side. Is what the Democrats or the Republicans are proposing, which one makes the most sense to me, and that's the way people will vote.
And don't let yourself get sucked in by, manipulated by fear and, misplaced empathy and all these kinds of things. I do think it's important for us to realize that everybody's trying to manipulate you, in that sphere, especially on a large scale. And to just get back to, knowing what issues are important to you, why they're important, what things actually produce the results you want to see happen. There's a lot of times, just to get back to this, I mean, there's issues where, you want to see things change. And I think as a conservative, it's like, we have to worry less about the kind of the all or nothing strategy, because we're just getting, they're just getting nothing. And you can't, it's like we talked about this. You can't win games if all you call is Hail Marys. You'll lose every game. You got to be able to, get a yard here, get a yard there, maybe make a larger gain, but it's more about consistently gaining ground as opposed to going from, a policy not being in place to a policy being fully enacted to the highest degree possible, next year. And so, this incrementalist approach, there's places where there's a lot of places where having no tolerance for compromise is appropriate. I remember being younger thinking that politics was one of those places, and the older I get, I think the more I realize that that's not a place where that works really at all for anybody. I think you have to be willing to play the long game. You have to be willing to gain ground where you can get it, and move towards that direction. I think as voters, we also need, you talked about the rhino thing, I think we talked about how Democrats have the same thing. They got dinos.
They call dinos. Yeah.
So it's like, we get into this thing where people become political zealots, and they don't realize what the game is. The game is not to, vacillate all the way over to one side and just, we've gotten into that with all the executive order stuff that's become popular on, once you open that box, everybody's got to use it. And so we're just having this thing now where every 4 years we just totally undo everything that happened because we didn't want to take the time to actually get it into law. We just did it all by executive order.
Well, the legislative process is so long and difficult. It's
it's not very social media like.
I had a professor in college tell me, that one of the most efficient forms of government is a benevolent dictator.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to go to a dictatorship, but there's some wisdom to that.
The problem is that no dictator ends up being benevolent.
Or forever. Yeah. And so, you're talking about the long game, but, I would agree. Culturally speaking, and I think the mindset of most Americans is that, we have a history of 250 years.
Yeah.
Okay. There are cultures out there that have been in existence for thousands of years. Okay.
Well, yeah. We went to Italy.
China,
there's lots of buildings older than this country.
Yeah.
Like pizza places.
And China, for instance, they think very long term strategically. They're not living for the next 100 years. They think long term. And a lot of other countries do too. And so, this is maybe something where it's a blessing and a curse. Okay, America is a great place that we birthed a lot of new ideas and innovation. It's just been incredible in America, but sometimes we might fail, at the long game because we're so short gamed. We're thinking this quarter or this play this quarter, this half. Whereas in other people's thinking in other countries like China, they're on to the, we just finished our first game, but we're already thinking about how we're going to win the Super Bowl.
Well, it's like your kids,
Yeah.
Like you go somewhere and you've been in the car like 15 minutes. They're like, man, are we almost there? It's taking forever. You're like, you're like, man, I've driven 40 hours in a row before. So
my mom and dad used to take us cross country to see our grandparents in North Carolina. And, back in those days, it was a 7-day drive. Several Christmases, I would have 3-week, Christmas breaks. We'd have a week to get there and a week there and then a week to get back. And, you learn, at least I learned at that young age, I have to occupy my mind while we're just sitting in the car, you know, and we didn't have video games and we didn't have
we just had to stare
cell
out the window.
phones. We stared out the window, you know, we learned to entertain ourselves with games and things like that in the car. And, you know, mom and dad would stop along the way and make life interesting. And I think that's really our journey too, you know, as citizens of Lewis County, is that, you know, we're all on this long road trip together, and our goal is to make life better for not only ourselves, but for our kids and our grandkids, you know, and that along the way we need to stop and smell the roses, and we need to celebrate each other's, you know, successes and victories. We need to make course corrections here and there. I remember Mom showing me how to read a map, you know, and, you know, if we made a wrong turn, sometimes it would be, you know, 50 miles before we could turn around. You know, I mean, it was just, you know, life was different in those days. Now, you know, you've got Google, and, you know, there's turnoffs every so often. You know, you don't have to go so far out of your way. You can get to your destination quicker. Well, sometimes the things that are most hard fought are the most valuable to us in the long run.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we look at politics, we should look at it as, you know, a chess game, perhaps, you know, but again, the opponent is not our enemy. You know, my enemies are not the Democrats. My enemies aren't with, people that disagree with me. My enemies are those from outside that are trying to do me harm, trying to do you harm. That's my enemy, because we need to be thinking more and protecting and helping each other. And I think that this idea of, you know, the state, you know, providing the justice and us people providing the mercy.
Correct,
you know, and then, you know, to walk humbly with God, that again ties into the three institutions that I talked about at the beginning of this program. You know, that if we can all work within our lane with respect for one another, there isn't anything that we couldn't do.
Yeah.
You know, there's no reason why Lewis County, in my opinion, can't be as prosperous as King County if we walk together in unity, and we, you know, we look for the best solutions to the problems that ail us. You know, I would love for Lewis County to be not dependent upon grant monies and help from the state. Wouldn't it be great if we could develop the industry here in Lewis County, that we're able to be a net exporter of our wealth and our resource and our and our treasure, you know, to benefit others. And I think that that's a personal goal of mine, to try to leave the place better than when I found it.
Yeah.
You know, and that goes along the line of, you know, my lifelong call to service is to try to leave in my wake a better, you know, Kirkland Road where I live, or, you know, Lewis County where, you know, where I currently live, you know, a better Washington State, you know, to leave it better in my wake than it was when I got here.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for coming in. I think that's a good place to leave it.
Okay.
You know, you know, I think you'd be great. I know everything that I've been around you and I've seen you do, you take it real serious. I think you take all these things you've talked about really seriously in my observation. You know, I think it's important to you to get to the most beneficial thing for the widest group of people. I've seen you do that a lot. So
thank you. Thank you.
I really admire that stuff about how you operate. There's so many people who will inhabit these roles and just do them to be there, and that's definitely not, you know, that's definitely not how you operate. So I think you'd be great.
Thank you.
And I've really enjoyed working with you, and you're much more buttoned up than I am on the planning commission.
Well, I really enjoy the planning commission.
Yeah, with me as the vice, you're not in any danger of not running a meeting. They don't. I don't think they want that too much. So, but yeah, no, I think I like I said, I think you'd be great, and I think if you got in there, I have no doubt you would do the very best job that you could figure out, and so yeah.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. And it's encouraging to hear similar things from other people. You know, the things that give me the most grief are from the people that don't know me that well, you know, and they, you know, might misinterpret my intentions or what, you know, but, you know, I'm not the perfect speaker, so I might make mistakes, you know, but I don't think anybody should ever be able to doubt the intent of my heart. And, you know, it truly is, you know, not from a politician's bent, but from a servant's position. And, you know, that's what I bring to the table. And if my one of my opponents gets it, I will support them absolutely 100% and do whatever I can to you know, to help them succeed. Because if, you know, whoever's in these positions, you know, gets it, if they succeed, we all succeed. So to me, it's not about me. It's about, you know, it's about the mission. And the mission is to make sure good people get elected to county government and that we provide the best service that we can to our citizens.
Yeah. So if people want to find out about the campaign or get involved, where do we send them?
We are still working on getting a website and all of that stuff, but I do have an email address that, you know, somebody could reach out to me, and it is Frank Corbin, the number 4, LC for Lewis County, at gmail.com. That's Frank Corbin, 4LC at gmail.com. We will be going on social media and also a website, you know, as soon as I finish putting my team together. And, you know, I just filed with the PDC a little over 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So,
you know,
real
new.
You know, you can't really do a whole lot of work until you file with the PDC. And then when you file with the PDC, it's like the floodgates are open. So, you know, right now I'm a one-man band. So, you know, each extremity is trying to do its thing. And, you know, but, you know, I have a number of people that are offering to help. And so we'll just continue building our team, and we're going to build this plane in the air, and and you know,
well, we'll get this thing up, we'll get you tagged in it, and then that way you can get it out to whoever, and people can get to know you and what you're about and what your thinking is, and I mean, that's the hope of this thing, that people actually know the people they're voting for. I mean, you know, ideally you go out there as a candidate and you are as authentic as you can possibly be, so that if you win, it's because you will, by nature, represent people accurately, because you've been authentic through the process, and people are voting for you because you represent them. You know, they feel like you represent them. So, ideally, that's what people do, and hopefully we can, you know, provide something where people can really get to know. Because I mean, we say this all the time, man. I think we consistently underestimate how important local government officials are to our day-to-day lives, and severely overestimate the amount of importance that federal officials have on our day-to-day lives. And we know very little about who we're voting for, or who's even running, until a ballot shows up at our house, and then, you know, you can't find anything. So,
well, everybody should serve. I think, you know, there's something that everybody can do, and that's what I would encourage people to do. You know, find a board or a commission, or, you know, find a project in your neighborhood that, you know, that needs done. You know, as Ronald Reagan used to say, you know, there's no limit to what we can achieve, you know, if we don't care who gets the credit.
Yeah.
And that's why I've always tried to live my life the way that I do. You know, I don't care about, you know, the awards and the accolades. I just stay mission focused, you know, get my job done. And, you know, the job is, you know, other people.
Yeah.
So I don't ever want anybody to think that I'm a politician, and that when I get elected to office, all of a sudden I'll turn into a Jekyll or Mr. Hyde kind of a situation. I am who I am, and I will serve whether I get elected or not. And so that's my commitment.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Awesome. Well,
thank you. You might have to break this episode up into 2 or 3. I don't know, how long did we go?
We'll just go as long as we want to go, and then we throw it out there. People can watch it over time, do whatever they need to do. Okay. That's the beauty of it.
Well, thank you for inviting me on to this, and I look forward to another opportunity if that should work out. And otherwise, we'll see you down the campaign trail.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Jason.
See you, everybody.